Hi, I'm Christina, and today is my 32nd birthday. And yesterday, when I started thinking about what I wanted most for my birthday, I realized that what I wanted most was freedom. And that is a gift that no other human can give me except for myself. And so, this is me telling my truth and telling my story and building my way to freedom. So, I was born, how do I even start this, right? I was born addicted to cocaine, and I was never apparently supposed to walk or talk or think like a normal child. I don't think I think like a normal person today, but probably more in a good way. And my biological mother couldn't keep me, and I ended up going into the foster care system. And there are no two people who will tell you the same story of what happened to me between the ages of when I was born until I'm 3. There are no two people who tell the same story. There are no two people who agree, so I really don't know. I do know that I was a foster child. I do know that I was in the system. I do know that I was adopted at 4. And I was adopted into what at the time looked and probably was a very good family. And about the time I was 4, I started being sexually abused by my foster sisters. And that abuse continued until I was 6. And it was sometimes violent, and it was always grotesque. And they would come get me out of my bed at night and do whatever they wanted to me. I have scars on my body from where they cut me with knives, and I have had a broken nose once from them hurting me. But most of the damage was psychological and emotional, and once my adopted mother caught one of them abusing me in the shower, and she got onto her really badly, but didn't report it to the state or anything, didn't try to protect me, didn't try to get rid of the girl or rehome the girl. She tried to fix it on her own, I suppose. When I was 6, my parents were no longer allowed to be foster parents, and because of different reasons. And my family moved from North Louisiana to South Louisiana. And at that point, my adopted mom started going into a really deep, really bad depression. And she started doing really, really terrible things. It didn't start out too terrible. It started out with, I liked washing dishes by hand after dinner. And so sometimes she would get angry with me, and she would go in the kitchen and she'd pull all the dishes out of every cabinet. And I would have to stand there on a little stool and wash the dishes. However long it took, I had to wash every dish in the house until it was clean. By the time I was 8, it turned into things like waking me up in the middle of the night, getting me out of bed, handing me a toothbrush, and telling me that I needed to scrub the bathroom with a toothbrush for the rest of the night. And so I would scrub the bathroom with a toothbrush for the rest of the night, and most of the time get a shower, and then get dressed and go to school with no sleep. And it was about the time I was 8 that I realized that drug use was happening in the home as well. My adopted father was an alcoholic. He treated me well. He never abused me. But there was a lot of neglect. There was a lot of ignoring the abuse. So by the time I was 8, there was drug use happening in front of me. Pretty bad verbal abuse happening. And then we moved from South Louisiana to Texas when I was 12. And that was about the time that stuff started to get really, really bad. I was about 12 years old. and my mom's drug dealer was standing at the door, and they were making an exchange, and I walked downstairs in some shorts and a tank top, something like a 12-year-old girl should be able to wear at home. And he looked at me and made a comment about my body. And my mom, the person who was supposed to be my mom, thought that it would be a good exchange to trade my body for her drugs. And that was the first time it happened. And it continued to happen. And it happened until I moved out. And even after I moved out, sometimes it continued when I would go back to visit. She was so good at lying. She was so good at lying that, she would convince me that when I would watch her shoot up, that I didn't actually see her use drugs or use a needle and there were a lot of times that I didn't know the difference between, reality and what she was telling me to believe. It took me a really long time and lots of therapy to understand what had been happening to me and to understand that it wasn't normal, because it was my normal. And so from the outside, I looked really successful. I was a varsity cheerleader and captain of the debate team, and I was in the science club and in DECA, the marketing club, and I, from the outside, I had all the things. And what people didn't realize is I would go home from church on Wednesday night and have a strange man pull me out of my bed, do whatever he wanted with my body so that she could get her next high. She convinced me. She used to tell me that the Bible says love covers a multitude of sins. So, Chrissy, if you love me, you'll cover and you won't tell. And I was so hungry to be loved. My first family couldn't keep me, didn't want me. And so here I was hustling for my worth. And I thought that I could earn it. I thought that I could earn her love by just letting her do what she wanted. And it was in high school. I was about 14 when my family started going to a different church. And the church we were going to, it was a good church. It was good people. And I felt safe there. And I found a home there. And I started preaching when I was 14, right? And I would look around at all these people, and they would tell me how good I was doing. And there were years, like my senior year of high school, where I fasted more days than I ate because I was just so hungry for God. And people would give me so much praise and so much appreciation, so much encouragement. And none of them knew the truth. I was lying to all of them. And that's something that I carry with me, because I kept waiting for one of them to help me. I kept waiting for somebody to hear from God, to see my pain, to notice a bruise, something, so that somebody would help me. And I was 16 the night we had a visiting pastor come. His name was Jojo. And he talked about how you have to have your Pauls, your Silases, and your Timothys. The people who pour into you, the people you pour into, and the people you just hang out with. And he preaches this sermon. And God puts it on my heart to go talk to this woman that I had never really met before. And to tell her that I was abused as a child. And so I walk up to her and I say, I need to tell you something. And who knows why she said, let's not talk in here, but she took me to a closet. And we went in this closet that had windows, and she sat on the floor with me and she said, now what is it? And I told her that my sisters used to sexually abuse me. And she just held me and she cried with me, and she told me that I would be okay. And that night, Debbie became my mom. She did not know at the time what was happening in my home. Nobody did. And she gave me a place to live. So I moved out of my adopted parents' home, away from my abusers, and I moved in with this other family. It would take 3 years before my adopted mother realized I moved out. I would still go back to visit. I would still go see them on holidays and have holiday dinners, but I didn't live there, and they didn't even know it. And so I say that Debbie is my godmom. She's the woman I call mom because God gave her to me. And I kept trucking, right? Like, I kept moving forward. And I went to college. And I put myself through college. I graduated debt-free at the top of my class because that was my way out. I sometimes worked 3 jobs. I did everything I had to do to become independent so that I never had to depend on my adopted family again, because I knew if I ever had to go back there, if I ever had to depend on them for anything, that it would be the end of my life. So I get to college and mostly things are like going well. I had this belief in my head that once I got out of that house, that everything would be okay, that I was abused there, but that I wouldn't be abused anymore, that I wouldn't be assaulted anymore, that my body would be my own to choose what I wanted to do with it. And then my sophomore year of college, I met this great guy, right? That's the beginning of a lot of really terrible stories, but also some good stories. But I met this guy who I started dating. He was good, he was kind, he met my family. And Labor Day weekend, my sophomore year of college, I went with him and some friends to the lake, and he date raped me. And it shattered me, because my whole life, all that I could ever remember thinking was, as soon as I get out of here, as soon as I get out of this house, no one can do this to me again. I'll be free. And that's not what happened. I learned within a year and a half of being out of that house, being in a different state, in a different place, that anything could happen, that bad things still happen. And I was shattered, and I was angry. Oh my goodness, was I angry? I was angry at the whole world. I was angry at God. So angry at God. I was angry at the people I went to church with, because I felt like so many of them had turned their back on me. And I hurt. I hurt. And so here's something that I learned, though. When I was in high school, I had this experience one Sunday night at church, and I felt like I had felt and seen the glory of God. And it was amazing, and it was beautiful, and it was powerful. And I thought, this is it. This is what God is. God is this strong, powerful feeling and this great light that I found in prayer, right? And that semester during my sophomore year of college, I learned that the glory of God is that when you are broken and you are so in despair, when you're not quite sure what you have left to live for, the glory of God is that you keep breathing. I found the glory of God when I found the strength to get out of bed in the morning, when I found the ability to believe that no matter where my life had been, I knew that there was a day on the horizon where it would get better. And by believing that, by finding some way to get out of bed, by finding some way to keep going. I didn't just feel and see and witness the glory of God. I lived the glory of God. So, even though I was fully realizing I was experiencing the glory of God by the ability to keep going in life, I made a series of really bad decisions. I dated bad guys. I almost married someone who was cheating on me. I found out I was pregnant and then miscarried the baby. It felt like everything in my life flipped upside down. And here I was making I really made some bad decisions during that time frame. But what I learned is, I learned compassion during that time, because I had always been the good girl. I had been the one who was praying all of the right prayers at the right time and fasting, and the girl who loved God and served God and did all the right things. And like, I thought I was earning the favor of God. I thought that I was earning my righteousness and my worthiness. And what I learned, not when I was in the midst of that semester, but as I came out of it, what I learned is that you don't earn your worthiness. It is there just because you're there. Like, I inhale and there's oxygen to go into my lungs. Therefore, I am worthy. I was created. I live and I breathe. Therefore, I'm worthy. I can't earn it. I can't do anything to make it go away. And so that was a beautiful realization for me. And it was also the point in my life where I started to change from being that person who looked at people who made different choices than I did, or who lived differently than I did. And I quit judging them, because I didn't understand what they had been through. I didn't understand what they had walked through in their life. I didn't know why they were making these choices, or whether it was right or wrong for them. I began to change my DNA because I made these bad choices, and I understood it didn't mean I was a bad person. I started to understand that other people making bad choices doesn't mean that they're a bad person either. And so I started to become different than who I had been before. And I continued to learn and grow, and I graduated college, and I moved to Chicago. I accepted a job with a solid company, the financial industry, in 2008, so I don't know about completely solid, but I accepted a job in Chicago, and I moved there with a couple of bags in the trunk of my car, a laundry basket, and an air mattress. And that was it. That was all I had when I got there. And I was going to do it. I was going to live this corporate experience. I was going to have this career. I was going to build this life. And failure was not an option. Failure meant going back into an abusive home. Failure meant not being able to stand on my own 2 feet. Failure meant not being able to find myself. And so here I am in this big job in this big city, and it was less than 6 months after I moved there. I had gone out to eat at a restaurant on Sunday night, and when I caught a cab home, someone grabbed the back of my hair and dragged me into a cab and assaulted me in the cab on my way home. The cab driver just kept driving while I was screaming, and I finally got him to pull over, and I just got out of the cab. And I remember walking home that night and thinking, okay, this is just it. This is just life. Life is like, hey, you get assaulted. That's just what happens. And that wasn't enough for me. A couple days later, it was a Wednesday night. I was going home from work. I was on the train from the office to my house, and I was assaulted again. Some punk high school kids got on the train and thought that they could push me up against the wall and touch my body and say really disgusting things to me. And luckily for me, there was a man on the train who often commuted with me, and he pulled one of the boys off of me and he slammed him into the side of the train, and he started yelling at him, and he threw him off the train. And I thanked him, and he tried to talk to me and calm me down, and I got off the train and I went back to my apartment. And the next day I got up and I got ready for work, and I went to work, and I noticed that I was a little off. I wasn't quite myself. And so I was in a rotational program, and the leader of the rotational program, I was like, okay, I just need to let her know I'm off. I'm not myself today. But it's not a big deal, it's not a big deal. So I pulled her aside and I was like, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? And so we went and we grabbed a huddle room, and I said, I just want you to know I'm a little off my game today because I got assaulted on the train on my way home last night, and it happened on Sunday too, so I'm not myself. And she started crying. And it was the first time that it occurred to me, this isn't normal. People don't get assaulted on Wednesday on their way home from work. To me, it was just a normal Wednesday. That had been my Wednesday from the age of 4 until the age of 17. Wednesday, you get assaulted. And so I didn't even realize that it wasn't normal for experiences like that to happen. So she said, sit right here, I'll be right back. And she left, and she came back into the room, and she had a phone number for the employee assistance program, and she had a taxi voucher. And she said, take the taxi voucher, take a taxi home. This was on a Thursday, and she said, I'll see you on Monday. Don't come back here until Monday. You call this number, and you go see a therapist. The company will pay for the first 5 visits. Go get help. And so I got in the cab, and I went home, and I thought, do I really need help? I don't know. And it was later that night. It was so late that night by the time I decided to call the number. And so I called the number, and they do this little thing called intake. And it went a little something like this. The person on the other end of the phone asks why I'm calling. And I explained my boss gave me this number because I was assaulted twice this week. She thinks I need to talk to somebody. It might help. And she says, okay, well, we ask a lot of questions, and I'm going to ask some questions so that we can match you up with the right person. And she asks, have you ever been abused before? And I was like, well, yeah, what kind of abuse? And she said, well, what about physical abuse? Have you ever been physically abused? And I said, yes. There was this situation and that situation. And I was like, but there wasn't a lot of physical abuse. It only happened maybe a dozen times that I got slapped around or beaten with a ruler. It wasn't that bad. And she said, okay, what about sexual abuse? And I was like, well, yeah, I got abused by my sisters, and then my mom's drug dealers, and then, this thing that happened in college, and then, obviously what happened twice that week trying to go home. And she said, what about mental abuse? I was like, well, yeah. My mom used to tell me that the Bible says love covers a multitude of sins, and if you love me, you'll cover my sins. You won't tell people what happens in our house. And she started calling me a whore by the time I was 12. And she said she would say degrading things to me and terrible things to me. And there was mental and emotional abuse as well. And she said, well, what about drug use? Have you ever been around drug use? And I said, well, I was born addicted to cocaine. My biological mom was addicted to cocaine. And then my adopted mom was failed multiple drug tests for methamphetamines and barbiturates. And yeah, I've been around a lot of drug use. And she said, well, what about alcohol? And I said, well, my adopted dad was an alcoholic, so I was raised around that. And she kept asking questions, and my answer kept being yes. And I remember when it was all put on paper like that, when I was asked all the questions in a row, I realized how bad it really, like, oh my goodness, this isn't normal. This isn't a normal life that somebody lives. And I got off the phone with her, and I called my godmom, and I said, oh my God, I'm screwed. How am I supposed to survive? What chance did I have? What chance did I have? And she was supportive, and she was encouraging, and the next day was a Friday. It's the first Friday in December. And I went to see Mary, my therapist, for the first time. And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of a lot of healing. So much healing. I have spent the past decade of my life in therapy, working on learning to love myself, working on healing. And it's funny because when I got there for my appointment, the office was empty, and I sat there and I filled out some paperwork, and I waited for this person to come in, and a woman walked in the door, and she kind of smelled like cigarettes, and she was a little overweight, and she had a limp, and her hair was messy, and she had a glass eye. And she goes, are you Christina? Yeah, I'm Christina. She goes, well, come on back, let's talk. And I remember thinking, how is this person going to help me? And she rescued me. She taught me that it was okay to forgive. She taught me that the definition of forgiveness isn't letting people off the hook, it's taking your hands off their throat. And session by session, day by day, I began taking my hands off of, first, my own throat. There was a lot of forgiving myself. I took my hands off of God's throat. So many people. And as I was going through therapy, there were a lot of times where I remembered something happening, and I know that it happened this way, but my adopted mom had lied to me and lied to me and lied to me and convinced me that I didn't understand what was really going on. And I would pick up the phone and I would call my adopted sister, Stacy, and I would say, Stacy, this is what I remember. Is this what happened? Is this true? Is this real? And she'd say, yeah, Chrissy, that's real. And so I had this sounding board that I could go to. And I started opening up more and more every day. And I'll never forget I had a date that was coming up, a date with a guy, and I was so excited about it. And I was out with one of my friends, and I was like, I've just never felt this way. I've never been excited. And she turned to me and she said, welcome to the land of the feeling. You've been shut down for so long that I don't think you knew how to feel, and I think you're learning how to feel now for the first time. And it was so true, because in order to protect myself, in order to be the most safe that I could be, I had to shut down my ability to feel pain, my ability to feel the impact of the abuse, my ability to feel love or excitement. I had to shut it all down in order to survive my childhood and my teen years. And so I started to feel again, and it was overwhelming. It was so overwhelming. For my 23rd birthday, Mary gave me the phone number of my biological mom. And so on my birthday, I called her, and she lives in an assisted living facility. And they got her on the phone, and she picked up the phone and she said, "Hello." And I said, "It's Christina." She started singing happy birthday to me. 23 years of thinking that I wasn't wanted and wasn't good enough. And all of a sudden, in that moment, I realized that she did want me as much as she could, that she did love me to the most of her capacity. And some healing happened. And I got to meet my biological family after that. Over the next several months, I met aunts and uncles and a brother and a sister and cousins. And they're all amazing, lovely, beautiful, accepting people that I'm so thankful to share DNA with. And it's been, getting to know them has been one of the greatest joys of my life. I went around with this hole in my heart because I felt like I needed and wanted them in my life desperately. And in my mind, I always imagined that they were okay. They were all okay because they had each other, and I was the one who didn't have them. And as I've met them, what I've learned is that they all had a Christina-shaped hole in their heart. They all had the same pain and the same struggles. But I never would have known that, So it's been this beautiful, beautiful unraveling experience of getting to know all of them. There were, my goodness, so many other things that have happened. So many. Cervical cancer, abusive boyfriends, threats from my adopted mother when I cut them out of my life completely, threats to come after me, death of friends. There have been so many unreal experiences that I've had in this life. And these are the things that I've learned. I have learned that nobody can take my soul. That they can rape me, and they can abuse me, and they can call me worthless. That they can slap me around. That they can relegate me and interrupt me and dismiss me. But they never get to determine my worth. They never get to take or own my soul. That is mine. I get to own that. They also don't get to make me hate. I've had this really hard time reconciling my adopted mom. Because on one hand, she was my greatest tormentor. She abused me most days of my life. And on the other hand, she fed me, and she took me when other foster homes wouldn't take me. And she taught me finance and how to manage money. And she taught me to believe in myself. She is the one who, when I was 7 years old and I learned about Egypt and the pyramids in school, and I came home and I said, I want to go to Egypt one day, she looked at me with her crazy eyes and she said, you will. One day you will, because anything you believe you can do, Chrissy, you can do it. And then we went to eat at a Mexican restaurant later that night, and she proceeded to tell the waitress that I could do anything I wanted to do, and I wanted to go to Egypt, so I would go one day. And how do I reconcile that woman who believed in me, who believed in me so much, with the same woman who sold my body for a high? And I And I couldn't reconcile it, and I couldn't reconcile it. So for my 30th birthday, I went to Egypt because I believed that when I stood in front of the pyramids and I looked at them, that it would click, that I would finally understand. And so my brother went with me, and we went to Egypt, and I stood in front of the pyramids. And this is what I learned. I learned that she can never be reconciled. The good, the bad, the ugly, all the things, I cannot reconcile it. I am the reconciliation. The way I choose to live my life, the fact that I refuse to become an abuser, I refuse to become somebody who hates, I refuse to become an addict. I will love as much as she hated, as much as she abused. I will love and I will nurture and I will support. I will not become what my abuser tried to make me become. And that is the reconciliation. The reconciliation is that by every breath I take, I heal part of this world. By every day that I choose to live in joy, by every day that I choose to love the people in my life, no matter how scary loving people can be, that is the reconciliation for her sin. I don't answer to her. I answer to my own soul. I also learned that it doesn't matter that how people treat you and what people see as your worth does not actually change your worth. I am, therefore I'm worthy. I can't earn it. I can't destroy it. I can't hustle for more of it. I can't behave badly and have less of it. I am worthy. And there's absolutely nothing that anybody can do about it. That is so freeing. That's a decade of therapy. That's a decade of therapy and a decade of prayers and probably 30 years of prayers of some people for me to have that realization that just because somebody else doesn't see my worth doesn't mean that it's not there. Just because somebody treats me like a piece of crap does not mean that I am a piece of crap. I am worthy. I am, therefore I am worthy. And I think one of the most important things I've learned is that no matter what was going on in life, when I needed something, it was there. When I needed a mother, I had a mother. It wasn't always the same one. Sometimes it was, for my birth it was Colleen, and for a couple years it was Barbara, and my godmom is Debbie, and I had Sister Gina and Sister Diane, and I had Miss Gloria, and I had Mama Jessie in Chicago, and I've had Virginia and Ariella here in Louisville, and I have always had mothers. I have an abundance of mothers. And when I needed a father, I had fathers. There were men who were there and supportive and loving and encouraging of me. I had a DNA sponsor, and I had an adopted father, Billy, and I had Andy, and I had my pops, George, and I had Dr. Clark, and every time I have needed a father, I had a father, and every time I've needed a sister, I had a sister. I had Stacy, and I had Kelly, and I've gotten to know Sarah, and I then had an abundance of sisters, right? I had Ronak and Christine and Jody and Anika, and I've always had a sister when I needed one, and I've had brothers when I needed them. I had Charles and Jeremiah, and I had Kyle and Josh who helped carry my heart when it was too heavy to carry myself. And I've had Russell, and I've had, now in the relationship I'm in, I get my boyfriend's 3 brothers. I've always had the family I needed, even if it wasn't the family I expected or even the one I necessarily wanted in that moment. I have always had the family I needed. I've just not always been grateful for it. I've not always seen it, and I've not always been grateful for it. Even grandparents. My adopted grandparents didn't like me too much. They didn't treat me really well. But I had Barbara and Melvin who loved me so dearly. I had my friend Jody's grandfather who told me stories about his life that made me feel less alone in this world, made me feel seen. It was actually the impetus for this video. My friend Jody's grandfather, he passed away last week, but the first time I met him a couple years back, he was a Holocaust survivor, and I met him and we were talking, and he started telling me stories about the Holocaust, and my friend Jody got really emotional, and she said, "Christina, he doesn't tell people about this." And I said, I knew in my heart why he told me. Because when he talked about being enslaved and not having control over his body and not having control over his life, but how he overcame and how he had a happy life, I felt seen. And I felt not alone. For the very first time, I felt not alone. And he died this past week. And I felt this absence. I felt this great absence of not being quite certain if there was another person on this planet who understood. And then I realized that I have this great opportunity to be a light for somebody else. I have this opportunity to be honest, to tell my truth, and to not be ashamed of my truth, and that by doing that, I might make somebody else not feel alone. And that's what this is. That is me. This is me. Being brave and overcoming my fear and setting myself free by telling my truth so that maybe I can be a light for someone else the way that Jacob was a light for me. Thank you if you're still watching this. This has been quite long. Thank you for watching. Thank you for loving me and being a part of my life. I'm so sincerely sorry for any lie I've told or any hurt I've caused. I spent a long time just trying to survive, and now I get to live. Now I get to really live. Thank you. Happy birthday. Oh. Happy birthday.